Hey family, it's Valerie Denise Jones back at it again. What y'all doing? Anyway, before I get started, I want to send a big shout out to everybody who has repurposed my videos. I appreciate you guys so much. And also, thank you for adding my full name in your description box. Thank you for adding my full name in your description box. Let's grow our subscribers. Subscribe, grow, network. Yes, we got this. I appreciate you so much for sharing the love. That means so much to me. We love Just Your Brown. I love you to life. We're all growing, and that's what's important to me. Oh, yeah, before I forget, a big shout out to Angela Yee, who shouted me out once upon a time.
Hey, Judge Joe Brown has some issues. He was talking to Umar Johnson, and they were on Valerie Denise Jones's show, and they were talking about Harriet Tubman and putting her on the $20 bill. Judge Joe Brown.
Now, let's get to today's agenda. Question. Do you think Wendy Williams should take Brock up on his offer?
You know what I'm saying? But I'm a mean. You understand what I'm saying? Don't mistake my crying for a failure. Don't mistake my tears for weakness.
Y'all remember Brock, right? I don't know. I think it's might be a good idea, but
Just public. All you gotta do is go look it up, huh? I didn't come here to find out what you think.
No, I'm just asking.
No, you didn't. You say you thought. I'm not interviewing you. You interviewing me. I don't want to hear it.
Okay.
Huh? But you go do it. I respect who you gonna be. So don't sit here and tell me you thought it was.
Wendy Williams' situation has sparked a conversation about guardianship laws. The media icon's outcry has been headlining major stories. A new proposed legislation could give families a legal way to visit loved ones under guardianship, with guardians having 10 days to object if there's a valid reason. This could be a game changer, as Wendy's case has highlighted how even celebrities can face these challenges.
So y'all know I told y'all about that judge and that guardian, Sabrina Massey, that's supposed to be in the care of taking care of Wendy Williams. Well, now the judge is mad about her talking to the media. The judge is mad that she went to the hospital and took the test and passed it. And wants to put her in a facility that has more restrictions. How y'all mad? How you want to lock her down in another facility where she can't do nothing? Tell me something, she's not going to be able to handle her newfound freedom. Free Wendy Williams, man. Say, man, free Wendy Williams.
How do you feel about the Free Wendy movement?
How do you feel about it?
Fabulous.
So our recent events have been unbelievable. Let's talk about.
We came back from dinner, and apparently police were called. But I was told that at some point, police were called because the coterie here was saying allegedly that I took my aunt from this facility and whisked her away without any sort of confirmation or approval, which according to everything that we have learned in terms of this whole situation, wondering exactly how that correlates with the statements that the Guardian has made, that Wendy is able to come and go as she pleases.
Right.
And that there are no family visits that are blocked.
Clearly, they are lying to me when they say I can go out and do what I want to do. This is my niece, Alex. She just flew in from Miami, okay? I just came from the hospital. So we are going out to celebrate. You know what I'm saying? Celebrate what? I don't know. I'm from life. The hospital. You know what I'm saying? And of life. Right. And this is what has been done to us.
But we're good. We're back.
We're good.
We're back in one piece.
I'm glad to hear.
A message has been received.
These people are going to plead their case. I don't hear.
Valerie, focus us back, and we are digressing.
well, as the story grows, I will keep you posted. But as Brother Dick Gregory said, it's all public. So as you learn, I will learn, and we will all learn together. So let's get into today's topic.
Well, by now you know exactly who Lori Schiller is for me. Not good. I began to ask questions about what's going on with my money. And she's got no answers for me. She's got no answers for me. This is very unfair. Wells Fargo is very unfair. They don't have any answers regarding my money. Lori Schiller and Wells Fargo have no answers regarding my money. Lori Schiller and Wells Fargo filed a guardianship petition because I want to know what's going on with my money, and Lori Schiller and Wells Fargo have not any answers for me regarding what has happened with my money that I've worked so hard for all of my life, but particularly now, more than ever, because I don't know what has happened to my money. And Bernie Young, oh yes, you remember Bernie Young. Bernie Young and Lori Schiller, I believe, are hand in hand working against me with regard to this situation. I believe this, and again, this is not good. And I know for a fact that Bernie Young used my American Express card, okay, and he hired lawyers to file a guardianship against me. Against me. Can you imagine that? Some doctor sent medical information without my permission. I knew nothing about this.
There's a big problem in this country with the financial banking system and Black people and our access to capital. You know, I know that when it breaks down, we have, 13 to 15% of the country trying to live off of half a percentage of wealth, 0.05% of wealth. So that's an issue. That's a problem.
Everybody right now is pimping and hustling Black folk. They've been pimping and hustling Black folk for 400 or 500 years. We spend approximately 97% to 98% of all our money outside of our own community, as an example. And we don't practice group economics. We don't practice group politics.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi.
Hello?
How are you? Hello.
Dr. Claude Anderson. Am I on the Joey Brown show?
Yes, you are live. You are live. Welcome, welcome. How are you?
Oh, physically, I'm in a terrible state. 2019 was a rough time for me. I've had all kind of health challenges, and because sort of half me got me quasi-depressed, but I'm coming out of it.
It's an honor and a pleasure to have you. So while we wait for the judge, why don't I go on and just start the interview, starting with question number 1, which has everything to do with Breakfast Club interview. I just played the audio and just wanted to know how you prepare for such a massive interview.
Oh, I didn't know very much about it. I never watched the program on TV, listened to it on the radio. So I was just open wide to whatever they tried to present to me and tried to respond to whatever questions were raised by them. And that was about the only preparation. And most of the preparation, everything dealing with the facts and about Black folk and the history of Black folk and social circumstances, that's pretty well embedded in my mind after about 60 years of working on trying to elevate Blacks across this country and writing 5 best-selling books, being the president of a Black think tank, the only Black think tank in the country, having spent a lot of my money filing lawsuits on behalf of Black folk in the federal courts in violation of the United States Constitution and also the 1866 Indian Treaty. So I had everything pretty much in my mind, whatever I want to talk about Black folk. I don't have to rehearse or practice for that.
Amen. I totally get it. And like the Breakfast Club, we've got a very, very young audience. Do you feel like your message reaches young people, especially the millennials?
I never tried to aim for them specifically. I just shoot for the broader market, and I'm hopeful that it will. And I shoot for the broader market, but if somebody doesn't do something pretty soon, it won't make any difference. This is a year what I call the year of reckoning, the year that bring the entire society into account for what they've done for black folk for 460 years and what they owe black folk. But I don't focus on the young crowd. I'm hopeful that they are concerned enough to try to look out for their own future and begin to prepare for it. That's why I wrote those 5 books, best-selling books that are popular around the world, to prepare these young people to say you got to understand what racism is, how it operates, how you got where you are, what kept you where you are, and what you got to do to get out of where you are. You're at the lowest level of a real-life monopoly game. And most of our young people don't understand what racism is. They think racism is whether or not you get along with somebody, whether or not you can date them, whether or not you can go by their house, whether you can go to their movies, or sit in their churches, or go to their schools. That has nothing in the world to do with racism. And so I don't focus on young people because I'm not sure they understand what racism is and what it's all about.
All right, Dr. Claude, this will be my last question because I think the judge is in the building. So I want to move the needle forward just a little bit. Being that millennials, they are not your niche market, I now want to just talk about blacks. Blacks, in particular, the ideas that we endorse. So as I watch the news, I feel that there's been a renewed focus on reparations for slavery, particularly for Democrats, and it's become sort of a political minefield for them, if you will. So, my question to you is, do you think that Blacks should continue to focus on reparations or not?
Most definitely should. That's one of the few options they have. They only got about 2 or 3 options. If they're going to be able to ever become a competitive people in society. One way is to the first way, I guess, if they were to go down and start printing their own money and capture their own wealth that way, or go steal the assets that they need, or they can seek reparation, holding society accountable for the wealth that they stole from black folk, and they can start practicing group economics, which means that $1.2 trillion to pass through their hands annually, start practicing group economics, make that money bounce 8 to 12 times within their own community. Just like Hispanic money bounces 6 to 7 times, white money bounces 8 to 12 times, Arab and Asian money bounces 13 to 14 times, Jewish money bounces 18 times within their own hands before it leaves to go to anyone else. Black money doesn't bounce once. Black folk have to learn how to recirculate their money in their own communities. But that's a whole other issue because they don't have the communities. All they got are neighborhoods, and they don't have a community nor a sense of community. And so it's a long thing to try to figure out how to get blacks up. But my books cover all those issues for them.
All right, Dr. Claude, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Again, I can't say that enough. We got the judge in the building. Judge Joe Brown is here.
How's everybody today, Doctor? How are you? Thank you for coming on.
Well, no, thank you. You know, I've admired you at a distance for a number of years. I always thought that you were the epitome of what I thought a black legal mind should be, and also I thought you were such a debonair black man. I always looked at you from a distance.
Thank you for that. I actually was trying to be more of a village chieftain than a judge. You know, the village chieftain had to act as the judge in the village, so it is what it is.
Well, I understand that. You know, I got a bunch of lawyers in my family and one judge, an appeal judge in the family, so I understand that completely. But I still admire you because you're a quick mind, you're a nice, attractive mind, and you used to set a lot of minds straight on your show. So I look up to you and I respect you the utmost.
Let me tell you a secret about that. What I did on the show, what I did on the bench and as a lawyer is based on the fact that at one time I had a physics major and I always looked for cause and effect. And I started using that, what shall we call it, empirical analysis process to apply to what goes on in the world and what came in front of me on the bench. So some people can't get ready for that because they're so caught off into what shall we call it, beliefs. You know, when people used to believe the world was flat, you'd fall off of it if you went far enough. So perhaps we need to start switching over to opinions that can be changed based on the acquisition of better knowledge, information, data, and analysis. But, you know, we are what we are, and we are people like everybody else, and we all have these flaws. But
you just articulated the major points of why I wrote those books and why I left government after being with presidents and governors all those years. You just laid it out exactly why, cause and effect.
I've got your book here sitting in front of me, Black Labor, and Sister borrowed one of your other books that I have here just a couple of days ago. So, yeah, go ahead. Anything you think the people need to know that you could tell them while you're here?
Well, yeah. Let me run through those books very quick and tell you. The whole point of the Black Labor, White Wealth was I wanted to do what I'd never seen in all my years in politics with governors and presidents and over education. Somebody would lay out exactly how black folk got into that dilemma. And Black Labor, White Wealth is written to carry you through a history at about 200 miles an hour to show you every trick, every trade, every public policy, every law that white folks use to maldistribute almost 100% of all this nation's wealth, land, power, resource, privileges, rights, businesses, and ownership into the hands of the dominant white society, which left black folk at the lowest level of a real-life monopoly game, which means they would totally be non-competitive. And in that book, it has timelines to show how it was done. And after writing that book, I then turned around and wrote the second book called Powernomics. Powernomics says that, yeah, white folk did all these things to you, and racism, but understand what racism is. Racism is a competitive relationship between people who are competing for their ownership and control its resources and use other people's labor. And I said that book told black people basically that white racism is not perfect. You can beat it if you understand it. It's like Judge Brown is saying, if you understand how you got where you are, figure it out and learn how to play the game, play it back. That's called Powernomics. That book was the second book. And the third and fourth book was written on dirty little secrets about black history and black heroes. And the fourth, other more dirty little secrets about black history and black heroes. And the last book and the final book was called 100, The Black History Reader, 101 Questions That You Never Thought to Ask. Those 5 books, Judge, give black folk almost every piece of information they should know about how we got where we are, why we're locked at where we are, and we don't do something pretty soon this year this should be a year of reckoning for black folk. They need to start learning how to hold the white society accountable for what they've done to black folk and redistribute some of the resources. Black folk came out of slavery owning 1/2 or 1% of the wealth in this nation. 150 years later, they're still stuck in the same exact places. They still own 1/2 or 1%, Judge. They do not own and control a sufficient amount of anything to be a competitive people. They're locked in box. They got to do it this year. Reparations one way. But more importantly, the better way is to build communities, start practicing group economics. Spend your own money with your own people in your own communities and learn how to compete with all these other groups, especially immigrants and everyone else coming into the country.
That's an idea. Let me ask you something. People have been saying to me, in fact, somebody read your book, said, well, what's going to happen when the Chinese get to the top of the world heap, and also the Chinese African influence that's coming in indirectly? It was put this way in terms of the Chinese population control measures over the last 50 years have resulted in, what shall we say, 5 or 6 men for every 3 women in China. And a lot of the surplus in China, in terms of the male population, is over in Africa right now working on various projects, and they're interbreeding with the African women. And now there are 2 generations of Chinese who are half black or 1/4 black. And they're becoming a new factor in the world today. And that African population that didn't go to China, but is a recent migration out or bringing out, that is now part of the Chinese population, will be an interesting influence on the world stage. Do you have any thoughts about that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, somewhat, because I took trade missions around the world for governors and presidents. I took trade missions to Africa, and one of the things that was happening that time is that Africa in general was still suffering from the breakdown through the Berlin Conference that occurred in 1886, when they divided Africa up into various kind of states, and they divided them up so they could not function as a team. I tried to bring about a globalization of that with Maynard Jackson back in about 1978, trying to develop a world trade fair down in Atlanta, Georgia, where I started have a reverse trade program going on to reunite them in the United States. Because what's happening right now is Africa in itself, most of those blacks can't make it the way they're going because most of the resources in Africa are still under control of the European societies, but the Chinese are bleeding in there real fast to try to take it over. And unfortunately, the model for the Chinese was set up by South Africa. They came up with their new constitution, and in that constitution, they unwittingly invited Chinese to come into Africa and come into South Africa and put in an affirmative action program for them to welcome them in and give them preferential treatments for programs and excluded their own black people. So the Chinese are coming in to try to dominate the resources in that country. They're doing a very effective job in starting in South Africa. They're going to spread all the way through Africa. The only hope that black folk got, they get not to be able to compete against that because you got too many Chinese. The best way to compete is they need 4 things to be a competitive group. To be a competitive group in a global market, you have to have 1, you have to have control of resources. 2, you have to have the political clout and understanding. 3, you have to have an economy. And 4, you have to have contact through your population and to be educated to be able to bring about those resources into a marketable form. Africa doesn't have, the black Africans don't have it. The resources in Africa are still pretty much controlled right now by the Europeans. The Chinese are coming in and compete with the Europeans to take it over. Now, what I would suggest is, I said that I want that reverse trade program set up for a very specific reason. What Africans have, they don't have the 3 things. They need 4 legs of a table. They don't have they don't have the clout that blacks in America have. In America, the blacks in America have 3 of those legs on that table. They got the political clout in this country. 2, they got the greatest amount of wealth. 3, they got the skills, but they don't have the resources. If you can get that 4th leg by hooking up those African nations with the blacks in America and let the blacks in America then be the guiding force, to be just like if blacks in America could come together and put in that fourth leg with the blacks in African nations real fast and then begin to dictate what's going to happen to Africans, to black people of African descent in Latin America and America and the Caribbean, they got a chance to be able to fight back and push back against the Chinese. The Chinese are going to use their population to spread out. They're doing it not only in Africa, they're going to go into the Caribbean, they're going to go into South America and spread them in there and put up satellites for the Chinese. So it's a very complex problem. Mixing and population mixture is not going to solve the problems for black folk. Right now, black folks in Africa, I guess, if they combine with blacks in all around the world, in America, they have about 24% of the world's population. But collectively, they still only have 1/2 of 1% of the wealth because the wealth in Africa is still controlled by Europeans, and the Chinese are going to take over the wealth and resources and subordinate those blacks. And they're going to use that South African Congress as a model for doing it.
That's interesting. Now, another factor here. I have heard discussion, or I've initiated some, that maybe what we need to get economic power in this country is for young blacks at a very early age, the youth, to start focusing on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, to come up with a new product, like you had with the dot-com revolution, Silicon Valley, and the various high-tech things that have spawned massive industries. The traditional ones seem to be rather glutted and well caught up into the economies of scale, finance, and deep pockets that would be very difficult to get into. What do you think about that possibility of young blacks buckling down in school and coming up with some new ideas to provide new opportunities for commerce and business?
Well, I think it'd be an excellent idea to allow people to be competitive. But basically, if you start talking about social dynamics, the education won't cut it at the bottom line unless it's like a 5-story building, Judge. And you first got to have a community. You got to have territory. You're in a competitive situation, owning, controlling resources, other people's labor, and then use it to enrich oneself. Black folk are outside the system and underneath it. So what I tell black folk to do, it's like a 5-story building. The first floor is economics. You got to have an economic structure, and you take that money that you got to practice commerce in a capitalist society, and build it in a specific community on specific turf. You're in a competitive situation. You can and then once you acquire that money and resources in an economy, You then go to the second floor. The second floor is politics. You don't have to worry about playing politics. If you haven't got an economy, you're not going to be very effective in politics. It's what you own and control. So when you get your economy started, take the money to get off the first floor and go to the second floor before you get into politics. Don't go in politics trying to get rich. Go into politics once you got wealth. Then you buy every politician on the second floor. All the politicians you can buy, you rent or lease them. And you take that money up on the first floor and you go and use those politicians and buy those politicians, make those politicians go to the third floor. The third floor is the court system and the legal system. Then and that's who controls most of that. Controls the court system is who's got the money. And then you go to take your money from that first floor, and then you also go into the fourth floor, which is in communication, mobilization, that's what you're going to need to be, so you can organize and communicate with your people and mobilize them. Then you go to the fifth floor. The fifth floor is education. Education is simply a tool. It's like a hammer and a saw. You got to have a place to practice it. I can have all kind of black folk to get education, but what they're going to happen if they don't build an economy at the bottom and have their own infrastructure, all they're going to do is get a couple of degrees and try to go into a white society, some other people's community, and try to practice their profession. They're not going to be very effective. And that's why I got black kids right now coming out of school with all kind of degrees, but they're working at McDonald's and Burger King with bachelor's degrees. Some of them got master's degrees but master nothing. That's why in cities, most of these major cities in the United States right now, half these black cities like in Detroit, Michigan, where that 50% of all the black kids that starting up in the first grade never graduate from high school, and those that do graduate are reading at the fourth or fifth grade level. It is still a competitive situation. Education, it can only be used if you start to the best when you have your own community, building your own industries and your own businesses, and enriching your own people. Right now, wealth is what black folk need. They got to use that education to build wealth in their own communities and their own students. You can't compete if you don't have wealth. Wealth, that's the biggest power in the country. Getting a degree is good, but if you got to go work in somebody else's community, somebody else's business, it's going to be diluted down to where it's almost ineffective. If you were to go back to 1866 when slavery ended, at that point in time, 96% of the black folk in the United States, which were enslaved, those people were totally illiterate. 98.6% could not read and write because we've had laws in this country that forbidden them to read and write. And if a person was caught teaching a black person to read and write, it would cost them $100. They could not teach black. So when slavery ended, 96% of all the black people could not read and write. But within 30 years, from 1866 up to 1896, that 30-year time period, black folk came out of slavery and pretty much by themselves with a little bit of help from a few abolitionists. They reduced their illiteracy rate from 96% down to 43%. No human beings in the history of this world have ever come out of 360 years of slavery and enslavement and reduced their illiteracy rate in half, less than half, in 30 years, almost by themselves. But going back to what the question you asked me earlier about the STEM program, but what happened though, even though black folks set the achievement record by 1896, this country was bringing in white Europeans around the country who also had about a 96% illiteracy rate. But they came into the country and they were brought into two classes. They brought into this country through the immigration policies to be owners of resources and our management of the black lower classes in this country. And so consequently, they went up as they came into the country and over black folk after 1896. So by 1956, as an example, a black person with a college education could not earn as a half of what a white person with a high school dropout could earn, because there's no connection between putting a black person into a wealth class based on education versus a white based on his skin color and white privilege. So what I'm saying to you is that black people hold the achievement record in education, but right now nobody's providing them the basic things they need, which is a community, so they have some ownership and control of resources, and secondly, to solve the problem of the lack of social cohesiveness so they can work together as a team. Racism is a team activity. Black folk are not playing as a team. They're not playing as a team in this country. They're not playing as a team in Africa. If they don't play as a team, they're going to lose by default.
Let me ask you something about that. Acting as a team and getting together seems to me that it's been sort of a historical reality that anytime you get people in a position to exercise power, or there are going to be groups where certain people do exercise power, even if they look homogenous, like, say, Europe, there's going to be conflict. Who's going to be in charge? Which particular gathering of people is going to control what goes on? Now, it looks like what I see these days is getting back to the mid-'60s, coming up on the mid-'60s. They haven't got there yet. And for the reasons you talked about, you're not talking to young people because they have wrong kind of ideation. But what do you have to say about the likely power battles that are going to go on about whose particular slant on what philosophy is going to control what happens?
Well, that's going to be based on the system called meritorious manumission. That's going to be a class issue. You're always going to have classes, even if all are blacks. You cannot have equality in a race-based society. It is impossible in theory and practice to have equality. It does not exist. The whole point of a race and racism is not to bring people together and unite them. It's to separate them and put them into a competitive position. You don't go to the Kentucky Derby, Judge, as you know already, to bet on horses and see which one they want them all to come in together. They're never going to come in together in a race. Race came out of racism. Racism came out of slavery that started in the 1500s. We're in a competitive situation. People are going to compete for resources and ownership of it. Now, in terms of blacks, that is a class issue. You're going to always have blacks that are not going to be equal. You're not going to have every black equal. They're going to be competitive. But then you get into the classism comes out after you get together as a group. Some are going to be lawyers, some are going to be doctors, some are going to be janitors. That's natural. But for the top part, that's called meritorious manumission. There are going to be blacks who are going to say, hey, what I want to do is that I'm not going to identify with the rest of the blacks. I want to get this kind. I want to cut this kind of deal for myself and my own personal family. That's going to happen. They want to be accepted by the white society. You're going to see them show up on the radio, on TV, and in the movies, but they're going to have no connection between the rest of the blacks. I did a study back in about 1960. In 1960, Judge, they had about 103 elected black officials in the entire United States. That was it. Only 103 black elected officials in 1960. I did a social discomfort study to find out what was the relationship between those 103 blacks elected officials and the discomfort between blacks in imprisonment, dysfunctional families, low educational achievement, imprisonment, income, and everything else. Then I waited to 1990. I did the same exact study using social discomfort indicators. And I looked at it again. It was very important because in that 30-year time period between 1960 and 1990, the number of black elected officials in this country went up from 103 up to over 9,000. That was a 9,000% increase. But guess what? And I looked at the indicators, looked at the results, and I said, damn, them folks should have definitely increased and been elevated with that many elected black officials. But I looked at the results. Black folks weren't elevated. They didn't improve. They went down. They went backwards because there's no connection between putting a black folk person in an appointed office or an elected office and the black masses getting benefits. There's a gap there where black folk do not get any connection between putting a black person in office because every black that gets in a public office or an elected office, the first thing I do is buy into meritorious manumission. It says, I'm here to represent everybody, all people. I'm not going to identify with my people. I'm going to take comfort in taking care of myself and my family. I'm not going to collect with the black masses.
What happens when it comes so that the ordinary people might get some early clue as to what to do?
Judge, that's an excellent thought and excellent question. But white folk took care of that long time ago. Back in 1970, I ran Jimmy Carter's campaign in the South and in Florida, and I became assistant secretary in the United States Department of Commerce. At that time, before I even left there, I wrote the affirmative action plan for the state of Florida. It became a national plan that spread across the United States. I wrote the real second affirmative action plan in the entire United States. The first one is the United States Constitution. That's an affirmative action plan strictly and solely for whites. I wrote an affirmative action plan in 1970, 1971 that was accepted pretty much across the country that said focus strictly on black folk. But the problem that you're asking about is that it's not going to happen. It's a myth that most people believe that somehow that we're going to have a breaking down in these color lines all over the country, and therefore everybody's going to come out and be equal. Everybody's going to say, kumbaya, we're all going to get along well. That's never going to happen. White folks already set that up. What they done, right, they set up a special system back in 1970 when I was in the White House. They set up an office of minority OMB at that time. They now said that basically black folk are a pariah in our society. They are a third rail. Nobody's going to go out of their way doing things specifically and solely to address
for black people. Well, listen, again, we had over 200 years of slavery. We had legalized discrimination and segregation, and now we have segregation and discrimination that is not legal but still exists and is a barrier to progress. We have disparities around housing. We have disparities around education. We have disparities around income. And we have to recognize that everybody did not start out on an equal footing in this country. And in particular, black people have not. And so we have got to recognize that and do something about that and give folks a lift up. That's why, for example, I'm proposing the LIFT Act. Give people who are making $100,000 or less as a family a tax credit, which will benefit and uplift 60% of black families who are in poverty.
So by default, it affects black families, but there's not a particular policy for African Americans that you would explore.
But no, if you look at the reality of who will benefit from certain policies, when you take into account that they're not starting at the same place and they're not starting on equal footing, it will directly benefit black children, black families, black homeowners, because the disparities are so significant. So if we focus on the specific issues that have resulted in the greatest disparities, and we understand that that's part of why we're doing it. Listen, the reality also is this: any policy that will benefit black people will benefit all of society. Let's be clear about that. Let's really be clear about that. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit black people. No, because whatever benefits that black family will benefit that community and society as a whole and the country. Right?
Let me ask you another question. My background grounding in physics suggests that there is, unfortunately, another problem that black folk have. We have not just being at the bottom, and it's not really being at the bottom, but it is a function that we serve that is very vital. There was a gentleman by the name of Conrad Lorenz. He was a Jewish behavioral psychologist, and he got into animal behavior. But he wrote a book called On Aggression, where he went away from animal behavior and he talked about human behavior. And he postulated a theory that America, unlike all other countries in the world, was possessed of an advantage. And that was it had black people, and it could scapegoat black people, even if vicariously, so that the mainstream would vent so much of its hostility and aggression on blacks that would leave, in effect, a more cohesive balance of the population. And I'm not so sure, I think he may be right about that. So in other words, one of the blocks to our position is that as long as we are here, we are so different from something I put up. I call it the block route. You can identify most of us from a block away, whereas Mexicans, Asians, Irish, Jewish, Italians, Spanish, they all sort of blend in at a block's distance for most people. But you can see us from a block away. So we can't hide. We can't drive down the street in obscurity because the police can see us in our cars, or somebody else can see us walking in and out of the store from a long distance away. So have you given any thought, or what do you think about this idea that one of our problems about getting off the bottom where we are is inherent in the fact that we serve such, if Lorenz is right, a vital function for the country as scapegoats to vent aggression upon.
Well, I'm not aware of the individual who wrote that or his writings, but I'm telling you this: he's right on the money, and so are you if you're leaning that way. That's exactly it. That's it. You serve as a vital function. You were the people in this country that enriched the country. Black folk have enriched with their labor every group of human beings on the earth, regardless of based on their nationality, ethnicity, religion. Every group has been enriched off of black folk. Black folk have been the foundation for them. Right now, black folk are still serving as a foundation for enrichment in this country. That's why any group coming to this country, when the first thing they want to do is set up some kind of a business where they can use black folk as a consumer class. And blacks don't have any wealth right now, as I said, because the wealth was stolen. And see, people say, why you got so many poor blacks? They're poor because wealth comes out of labor. You cannot have wealth without having labor. For 360 years, the dominant white society and all of its immigrant groups, they stole black folks' wealth. They stole their labor. And that labor then is why it was stolen and enriched white folks all over the country. All these groups coming to the country now saying now that black folk are locked in the bottom, let's use them as a consumer class. That's why blacks don't have any businesses. And when blacks came out of slavery, they owned 1/2 or 1% of the wealth. That meant the average white person in America owned 3,500 times more wealth than black people. You had about 2 white men together own more wealth in America than all 46 million black folk put together. And the way black folk are going right now, if white folks stop acquiring wealth, they would take black folk another 229 years to catch up to where white folk are today, even if white folks stop owning any wealth, period. And wealth is going to determine your ranking in your future. And right now it's estimated that if black folk don't get some wealth pretty soon, Judge, that by 2040 or 2050, black folk gonna have zero wealth in this country. That's period. Right, and just in poverty alone, they start talking about poverty. The typical white family in the United States, their median family wealth is $18,000. The median family wealth for black folk in America right now in poverty is zero. Because 38% of the black folk in America are beneath the poverty line. Nobody's focusing on these issues. Black folk are at the bottom. They are pariahs. They're like a third rail, and people are scared of them. They try to avoid them. They're not going to do anything to enrich them or improve the quality of life. That's why neither the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party, no presidential candidate or person holding the office of the president has ever done anything specifically and solely to aid black folk. They're not going to do it. They're not going to talk about it because they know blacks are a permanent pariah. They're an official permanent underclass. So I don't expect anybody to help them. That's why I got out of politics with the Democratic Party. I don't have a dog in either one of those fights. I don't care who gets elected. Nobody has any intent or motivation or incentive to do anything for black folk in the country. This year, black folk must begin to hold the entire society accountable and say we're going to start playing the game to win. We're going to start taking our $1.3 trillion and hold it in our hands, build our own communities, learn how to own and control resources, produce, make our money bounce 8 to 12 times like it does for everybody else. We're going to start practicing group economics. Group economics, that's the whole point of politics.
What do you think is the best possible way for us to start to get to that point of generating black wealth?
Fine. What's first we have to do is learn how to practice group economics and group politics. They say, and one of the 2 things that hurt us most during slavery, and that been focused on. One was that our wealth was stolen from us. Black folk weren't poor people when they were slaves. They weren't holding any assets, but they had one thing was the most powerful, strongest, wealthy, valuable thing on earth. You know what that was?
No, sir.
Their labor. And see, and it's black labor. Nobody teaches black folks that. Your labor, that black labor was the most invaluable thing they could have.
Interesting thing to consider.
Well, but you're right on. You got it, Judge. You got all the major points down pat.
All right, so thank you, doctors. I'm enjoying listening to you. I've been reading your book, but I haven't had a chance to really talk with you.
Which book are you reading?
Well, I read one, and right now I've got Black Labor, White Wealth that I'm holding in my hand.
Well, I tell you what, why don't you figure out how to get me an address? I'm going to personally send an autograph, send you down my last book called 101 Questions. That's about Black history. And I'm going to send that to you, and I want you to hold it sacred to your heart. You're a good man. You're a smart man. As I said, I just always looked up to you. And I thought you were
well, thank you, Doctor. I appreciate it.
You were so devastated.
You can get my details from Ms. Valor.